What is going on? Jean-Marc Reddick here. And today I have a very special guest, my good friend Arpam Dutta. And today we're going to be speaking about what to expect during your first year of medical school. And so a little bit of background. We finished our first year of medical school in May. Yeah.
Time flew by.
Oh, yeah. First year of medical school. So we are currently second years, and we are going through what is now our second pass of medical school. And so ideally, what I want to discuss in this episode is kind of things that we wish we would have known going into medical school, things we've learned during our first year of medical school, and how to best acclimate yourself to the School of Medicine, and how you can realistically hit the ground running so that way you don't really have to play catch up either midway through your semester, or you don't really feel like you're being blindsided when you're starting school, because there is just so much and it is such a transition period when you are starting school. So firstly, what I want Arpam to do is go ahead and introduce himself, and just we'll go from there talking about what you can really expect when you start school.
Hey guys, my name's Arpam Dutta. Like Jermaine said, he and I just finished our first year. It's kind of wild looking back on it. I graduated from Rice back in 2019. I was a kinesiology major with a sports medicine concentration. I knew pretty early on what I wanted to do. And after school finished, I wanted to really get some work experience because I knew that was one of the foundational skills that as a medical student, you never really develop until you're kind of thrown into that world. And so that was a big priority of mine. So I went into work. I got accepted here at TCOM and then took 2 years off and worked in between, and then went and got started from 2019 to 2021. And then we started up in 2021.
With the process of getting started with medical school, so how was, undergrad being kinesiology, and how was the transition for you going into medical school?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things being someone who takes gap years and you work and maybe don't do research is you kind of get disconnected from the field of medicine. So going back into it is definitely a transition. But I think for me, it definitely ended up being something I was looking forward to. I knew a lot of people that have gone through med school talk about how apprehensive they were about starting, but it seemed like it was something more that they were worried about and weren't as excited about, just because it was just such a quick thing from like college right into med school, right into residency. So I'm very grateful that I got to take some time to get perspective, and definitely made me realize that there was nothing else that I really wanted to do. So I got to kind of hit the ground being excited about all the work I was doing. And I think for most people, once they get started, they kind of realize that, wow, like this is happening. And then you adjust so much quicker than you ever think you possibly could have.
Yeah, I know for me, so I did undergrad, gap year, then grad school, and then medical school. And because of the way my grad school finished, I basically finished my thesis and doing like finishing up project and research projects. And then within a month, I was starting medical school. And so that time period between finishing grad school and starting medical school was very, very quick. And so I think there is definitely like, when I was working, it was just an entirely different lifestyle. And it's entirely, being a real adult is different. It's very hard to wrap your head around and have to explain until you're actually just doing it.
100%.
And so I think one of the big things with medical school is that you spend 4 years in undergrad, give or take, and you learn how you study, you learn how you're going to do well in school. And I think one of the big difficulties starting school is that you're like, okay, well, I'm starting medical school, I have to change everything I did. And that's not necessarily the case. And I know for me early on, I was like, well, it's different. It's medical school. I have to change what I did in grad school. And so like for me, I had acclimated to studying for like the biological sciences in grad school, but then going into medical school, I was like, oh no, I need to change it again. Because I had already gone through that transition period going into grad school from engineering. But for some reason, they put the fear of God into you and like
constantly. Yeah. I think at all schools, they constantly tell you what you did in undergrad isn't going to fly. It's like when they tell you in high school, like, oh, like college is going to be so different. Your professors aren't going to let certain things fly. It's not true at all. Like, just take it day by day, figure out what works for you. Don't listen to 30 different people giving you 30 different pieces of advice saying, do this. This is what worked for me. Like, pick and choose what sounds like has worked for you in the past. If it doesn't work for you in med school, then try to readjust. But I don't think you need to enter school with this grand idea of reshaping something that you've spent so long perfecting.
Oh yeah. And I think one of the other aspects when you're going into medical school is that because you have a different timeline because it's set up differently, is that obviously you need to make adjustments. So like with us, with medical school, our exam schedule is basically we had an exam, give or take, every 7, 14, or 21 days. And so while I don't have the ability to like take really, really detailed notes like I used to, because I'd have a midterm and then a final exam over the course of a semester. It doesn't mean that I couldn't adjust accordingly to my timeline, but still do similar things to how I was studying. So like for me, hard passes is one of the big things that I like to do to really retain material and like learn it over time and repetition. Because like by the time I finish a first pass, I fully expect me not to have retained basically anything. And just like, It's basically just like, it's like a trailer. It's like, hey, here's a trailer of what you're going to be learning about. And I'm like, okay, great. And then by the time I'm past 3, I'm like, maybe not.
For sure. I think one of the hardest things about medicine compared to other things, you read something the first time, even if you don't understand it, at least you know what all the words in the sentence are. So much of med school is you see all these new words thrown at you. So it's not just trying to take all of this knowledge and understand it, but it's also trying to like figure out what each bit is even talking about in the first place to retain the information. And so
it's a different language.
It is. And so that's why it's so great, like what Jermaine said, to do that first pass and you feel like you don't know anything. But every time you do another pass, you listen to a lecture, you kind of do some practice questions, even without realizing it, all of a sudden you know the material. And it was like, okay, well, I guess it does work.
Yeah. It's like one of those where if you're putting in the work and you're actually, actively trying to learn, it does pay off. It may not feel like it at the beginning, but for me, like come exam time, if I'm like, yeah, I basically have an understanding of all of this, but 2 weeks ago when I had first touched one of those lectures, I was like, this is Latin. This is a foreign language and some Russian and some French and some Italian. And I have no idea what they're asking me.
Funny thing is there is a little bit of everything picked into it.
Yeah, it is very much so like learning a new language. And I think it's daunting. It is very daunting, but it is one of those things that like, it is possible. And like, if you stay the course and you are, kind of honest with yourself and you do make course corrections as need be, it is entirely possible to do it. And I think that's one of those things that getting started with medical school, because it is so daunting, is one of those things that you do need to not be so hard on yourself. Because it is way too easy to be like, I'm not smart enough. There's so like, you're in medical school, there's 200 plus people that are ridiculously smart that you're around with. So your reference is entirely skewed. And so it is one of those where I think it is important not to be too hard on yourself and to just kind of take it, day by day, week by week, and just do your best, and just build off of that.
Yeah. I mean, for us in a lot of medical schools, I think the first class you take tends to be all the biomedical, like the biochemistry, the biology, you learn the Krebs cycle, all of that. And you remember that some people only did undergrad in maybe like English or history. And then some people are coming in with master's degrees in like biology. And so you all come in with a very different skill set and knowledge base, but you're all learning the same thing. So at the beginning, it can seem like you're very much behind, but you just really need to work on what works for you. Just stop comparing yourself to other people. Ignore the group chats where someone's like, oh, I've already done 17 lectures ahead and I started studying for the test halfway through the year. Just ignore those people. You don't need that energy in your life. Just really focus on what works for you. And I know that's hard, but having a focus on yourself is so much easier. Like, I think you figure that out by second year and everyone starts thriving so much more.
So one thing that came as a bit of a surprise to me was that not all medical schools are taught like honestly the same way or similarly at all. With TCOM in particular, we do a 2-pass system. And so we do a first pass during our first year, and then ending the first year, you start your second pass going into second year. And so that means you see the material 2 times over. Whereas I know some medical schools, like I'm familiar with Long, they do like a course, then do another course, and it's basically more like semesters, trimesters, things of that nature. And sometimes they may finish a course midway through their semester, but they're continuing on. It's not like they're seeing the material 2 times over. And so kind of briefly talking about TCOM and how it's set up. So how exactly is our school set up?
Yeah, I think one of the nice things is that TCOM is set up like most medical schools of the past, where most schools have done like a 2-pass system where you kind of spend the first year learning like the anatomy, the physiology, the way they explain it is everything that goes right in your body. And then the second year, you learn the pathology, so the disease states, everything that can go wrong with your body. And I think the two-pass system is very nice in the sense where you get a very holistic and detail-oriented, complete view of the medical world. But then there's also like the other models of like other schools where they shorten what's known as their preclinical years so that you can spend time doing other things like getting other additional degrees like an MPP or an MPH, spending time taking like research. And so it has its benefits. It has its like setbacks. It's really up to like.
And I think it's one of those where there's pros and cons to no matter whatever curriculum base that you have, there are pros and cons to it. So like, for example, if you do a one-pass system where you basically finish in 18 months and then you have, the dedicated time to do your board prep, that means basically it's going to be an 18-month period before you see, you've done MSS or you've done neuroanatomy or you've done like GI renal, but you haven't seen that in such a long period of time. And so there is some drawback to that, but you do have more time for dedicated board study. And then the other thing is that because you're all learning it at the same time, you may not have as detailed of a view on that perspective. So like you may have learned everything, pathology, anatomy, physiology, but it's been over a year since we did a neuroanatomy a little under a year ago.
Yeah.
It still feels like it's fresh enough that like I'm able to retain and recall information. Yeah. But again, because we are doing a two-pass system, we have an exam every 7, 10, 14, even 21 days. So we have exams all the time. So we're done. We're entirely done with neuro in basically a month. We're entirely done with GI renal in basically a month. And so everything ends up being compacted down. So if you're able to like really cram and really just like grind through material and get, 1,000+ slides of material into your brain in 2 weeks, that's great. If that's not for you, that's like one of those points where, during your medical school interview, it's a good idea to be like, hey, what's your curriculum? Like, how do you guys teach? Because like, I had no idea what a two-pass system was, even starting medical school when I knew that I was going to TCOM. But because some schools do it differently, that may weigh on your decision to which school you end up going to.
And we'll definitely talk about this aspect of it more. But one of the reasons you'll see like DO schools, which I really don't think it's possible for DO schools to go into the 1.5 year system, is because we have a component called OMM, which is a pretty involved and lengthy amount of time spent learning a whole different type of medicine.
Yeah. It's a different way that you can treat and take care of patients in a way that you otherwise wouldn't without that training. Right. So like we have anywhere between like, depending on the school, 300, 500 additional hours of like lab hours, hand-on stuff of doing DO specific or like osteopathic specific treatments. And you can, if you want to use that in your practice, by all means, you don't have to. It's just like I say it's another tool in your tool belt when it comes to treating patients. And certain specialties may lead it to be more useful than others. So for example, like family medicine, primary care, it may be more useful than like, for example, like we're interested in surgical specialties. There's going to be I'd say less of an opportunity to use that because, at the end of the day, if you're in surgery, you're in surgery.
Right. There's not much. So it's more like a soft tissue manipulation sorts of things. And it's definitely great for a lot of specialties. And even if you don't use it, like he said, we both want to go into surgical specialties where you just don't have time in your like day to maybe like go out and do this. But the experience you get from like hands-on patient interactions from so early on in your med school career is really good in getting you prepared for like interactions with patients in general for the rest of your life.
I think the other aspect for what's beneficial is like they talk a lot about like palpatory skills. So hi Daisy. So your ability to palpate and feel things that like otherwise you wouldn't on a physical exam. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing a physical on exam with a patient, there are certain things that you have to be able to feel. And like as a DO, because we spend so much time working with our hands, that is something you develop really early on. You spend a lot of time developing as year one in medical school, whereas like sometimes you won't do a physical exam, like a proper physical exam, until year 3, and that's when you're like already in the deep end and you may not be getting as much feedback on that. Right. So with TCOM and how we have things set up. So we have, lectures. A lot of what we do is we have like flip classes. So we have MLMs, lectures. A lot of it we can do at home. So you don't necessarily have to go to class. And then also we have a lot of our like clinical exams and our docs. So things that we get graded on, like physical exam stuff, OMM stuff, physical. And one of the things with that is that you do get feedback on these skills and those things that you're trying to develop, which I think is really useful because as a physician, you have to be able to do a good physical exam and you have to be able to like take feedback on how to improve your physical exam and ask the right questions.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. One of the biggest things that you don't really realize when you're going into your rotations is how important it is to have your physical exam skills down cold. Like absolutely, like if you can walk into a room and they ask you like questions of like whether you're in family medicine, internal medicine, surgery, anything, if you can be able to like respond with doing a physical exam when asked, it goes such a long way. And it's one of those skills that no matter what field you go into, almost 90% of them all require some form of physical exam skills. So definitely work on it. It's hard to like focus time in med school on things that aren't like straight up lectures because it feels like everything else isn't being graded. They're all like pass fail things. And so it's really easy to get caught up in the, I'm only going to focus on what's actually being graded into my rank and stuff like that. But these things and these soft skills are so important and crucial in you becoming like a well-balanced doctor.
So then how would you say our course load is compared to your undergrad course load?
Yeah. So I think no matter what undergrad you went to, the work in medical school is going to be more. Like undoubtedly, unless you were like a triple major or something, like you are going to have more work in medical school than you ever had. The degree of difficulty, I think, will vary compared to like your major and everything else. What I have noticed for myself and what I've like noticed from like other people who went to Rice for undergrad, I think the material is inherently easier because medical material is just, it makes sense. There's nothing out to really trick you. It's just the fact that there's so much. Whereas in undergrad, when you take courses like physics, organic chemistry, truly like one of the hardest parts about those classes is understanding the concepts and being able to apply them. Whereas in med school, I think a lot of it is just being able to absorb such an obscene amount of information and be able to like go through testing on like 3-4 hour tests and do that.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect that with medical school that can be sometimes difficult is that there are times when you're asked third order questions, fourth order questions on something. So not only do you be able to like pull, this obscene amount of information, but you also have to be able to, okay, what is the disease they're talking about? What is the gene that they're asking about? And like, what does that do? Like, how do you regulate that gene? What drug affects that? And so because of it, it's not just like, can you spit and regurgitate all this information? Can you think on the nth order of this question that we're asking about, like this disease presentation? Because like, in medical school, obviously, you're going to have like, it's going to be pretty black or white. They're not going to ask you questions often,
For the most part,
that are going to have like 6 disease presentations. Because like, obviously, when you have a patient, they're not going to present like a textbook. But for the most part, it's like, can you remember all of the big de facto details about this disease and all the other things that go with it as far as like genetics goes with it, drug regulation goes with it. And so I think that's one of those where, because we're talking about the sheer amount of information, is you have to be able to compartmentalize so many different aspects of certain diseases, especially in PASS 2. Whereas that's a little different for our PASS 1 is that we didn't have to memorize all that. It was just like, do you know the anatomy? Yes or no?
Yeah, I guess I didn't even think about it, but as you go through the like process and we got to like more and more like in-depth classes and we were through the semester, we started getting pharmacology incorporated and like treatment modalities. And now that we're in second year, a lot of the stuff is they'll give you a disease presentation. So not only do you have to memorize that, but just because it's a multiple choice test doesn't mean you'll just see something and be like, oh, I remember that. It's not like a definition answer. You got to know what pathology it is and then try to remember exactly what the treatment is for that specific thing. And so you have to know the things really well. And it's so much detail in such a short amount of time. And everyone uses the annoying phrase of drinking from a fire hose. And I feel like one person just coined it and they ran with it. And
see, I say baptism by fire. And that's my preferred term.
Hey, whatever works. Just, I think as long as people understand that it's a lot, but it's not impossible by any means. Like so many people have done it before.
So picture this. You are just starting medical school. It is your first day. What would you tell your past self now?
I think the biggest piece of advice I'd give my past self is it's okay. What you did in undergrad, just try that out first. That's the first piece of advice. And I did. But I think in my mind, I saw so many people working with like Anki, people already referencing first aid, boards and beyonds, sketchy. There's so many different resources out there, and different people are going to utilize different ones because it works for them. But for me, even in undergrad, I did a pass system where I would try to do 3 to 4 passes of all my lectures. And that's all I would really need to do. And it worked. And same thing now, once I started, I was like, okay, I'm going to aim for 4 passes and then I'm going to see how I'm feeling about the material. Went well. And now that's all I do. And so kind of the way that I've learned to really study and feel like the reason I don't feel nervous going into most tests is because I have reverse engineered a way where I know exactly how many passes of the material I have to look through in order to feel confident. And so I try to take the guessing aspect of it out, because really the guessing aspect, the procrastinating aspect, that's what builds a lot of this testing anxiety. So I figured out what works for me, like a test or 2 in, most people can have an idea of what works. And then since then, I go through this master list of like listing out the PowerPoints, the different questions we have, like practice questions available to us. And I like make like tally marks of what I need to go through. And as long as I go through them, I feel good going through a test. So I think really just find a start and stop point. Don't just keep it vague and try to wing it. Find a set start and stop point and then work from there, and then alter it every test, every quiz, whatever works.
Yeah, I think being honest with yourself is one of the biggest things that I would say is like there's no, like I've done this before, and I remember this for what was it, cardio, is that like I was like, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with the material, I'm just gonna keep grinding, and every subsequent day I would sleep a little less. By the time I had one of our exams, I think I had pounded like about 900 milligrams of caffeine.
Yeah.
And then we went to brunch afterwards, and I was entirely disassociated. Like I was physically there, but my mind was elsewhere. And like everyone was like, "Are you okay, dude?" I'm like, "What?"
I've never been worried for you until that day when I was like, okay, we need to figure something out because there's a little too much caffeine in you.
And so it was one of those where like I wasn't comfortable with how I felt about the material, and I was pushing myself too hard. And so like I ended up doing worse on that exam, even though I spent more hours studying, because like I wasn't trying to focus on balance. And I think that's one of those where it's really important to have some semblance of a balance. Yeah, you're in medical school. Obviously you need to grind like you're a medical school student. That being said, there is a benefit to sleeping. There is a benefit to making sure that you're eating decently, that you're like taking time to socialize with your friends, that you're taking time for yourself outside of school, that like, yeah, maybe you're not, binging a Netflix series once a week, but you do have some semblance of a balance, and you do have some time for yourself, and you are like making sure that, hey, if I can take care of myself, I can take care of my school and I can take care of my grades. And I think that's like one of the biggest things that I would tell myself going into it, is that like I can't just keep pushing myself, because then I go into the next week and I'm entirely drained, and then I have to spend the next half of that week trying to catch up on sleep, trying to get my feet back into it, because I just literally killed myself trying to study for one exam.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, being honest with yourself is so important. For me, one of my biggest problems I think I had at the beginning, which I really would wish I could go back and tell myself this, I read literally every line from every PowerPoint and I thought that it was important. Because I think the way I had gone through the education system up until then, anything was fair game. And so any little small detail could be something that could make or break like a test for you. And once you get to med school, because the game is very different, you really need to be able to focus on big picture aspects and then go through a process of strategizing, like being able to come to an answer based on your knowledge. Because whether or not you think it's true, you do know the answer. Like a lot of the times you've done the work. If you've done it, you know the answer. But I was so hyper focused on knowing every little detail because I thought it would make a big difference in my grade. It doesn't. It won't. Get some sleep. Do some things that make you happy. Study just a little bit less if you really like need to, and make sure you like prioritize things that aren't just your grades.
So, outside of just being involved with your didactics, your coursework, and just grinding through school, there are a lot of other things that you can get involved with. So, for example, like we're involved with the orthopedic group on campus. We're also involved with the surgery group on campus. I'm part of PM&R, and then we're both also ICC reps for our respective advisory colleges. And I think it's one of those things that can kind of go under the radar is leadership in clubs. And so, how would you recommend someone get involved in a club? How would you recommend someone go about finding leadership in a club? And like, what does that open up for them as far as, getting involved with a club?
Yeah. So I think the biggest way for a lot of students to get involved in clubs is to apply for first year rep positions. I know that's what our school does. I know that's what a lot of other schools do too. So for like the surgery club that Jermaine and I are now officers for, we were both first year reps for that club. Something else is that even if you aren't a first year rep, doesn't mean that you can't go out of your way to participate in a club. So journal clubs, suture clinics, when there are guest speakers, just try to go to everything, because your job as a medical student is to be a sponge. There is never going to be a point in your life where everyone who meets you is going to want to teach you. This is your point to absorb everything. And so the more you do in terms of putting yourself out there, the more you will be able to like gain out of the tuition money you are paying, because it is a lot of money. Don't just skate by and try to pass the 4 years, really try to grow. And so for clubs, I don't think you should waste your time doing any clubs that you don't actually find engaging or interesting. If you don't want to do like radiology, don't join the radiology club just to throw it on your resume. No one's going to ask you about it. No one's going to care about it. All it's going to do is pull away your time from doing something that could actually matter, like volunteering. Like if that's something you enjoy doing, make sure you do that, because when you get asked on your residency applications about yourself, it's going to make your life so much easier when you talk about things that you did that made an impact not only on yourself, but you felt like you were able to make an impact on yourself too.
Yeah, and I think on that note that you're talking about showing up and actually being present, when they're picking first year reps, when they're picking officers, when we're trying to find people that like we want to represent the club, going into their second year, showing up and being present is going to be like first and foremost the most important thing. So if you're like, hey, I'm interested in radiology, but I didn't get that first year rep, keep showing up, keep showing face, because I'm like, hey, this dude is actually interested. This person really wants to like be involved. And at the end of the day, like it shows that you're committed to that field, that club, that thing that you're involved with. And then when you are like, writing out your CV and your ERAS application, it's like, for example, you could be like part of hosting a mini conference. You could be the person that like reached out and found a guest lecturer. So like you make a connection with a physician that can guest speak, but because that person is the one that you actually reached out to and you got them to speak at your club, you'd be like, hey, can I shadow you? Hey, will you be my mentor? It's because you went above and beyond and they actually see that you're interested and you want to be involved. People are going to try and meet you halfway. And I think it's one of those where it's really easy to feel like you have to do every little thing. And there's so many clubs. We probably have 100, 200 clubs on campus, but pick and choose your top 3 and be most involved in those. And you're going to find that you get a lot more out of it rather than trying to attend every meeting for 12 different clubs. And I think earlier on, like when we first had, we had a block party going to school, I'm like, oh, I need to do this club. Oh, I need to do this club. And all these people, obviously they're trying to sell their club to you and they're trying to get you involved and, build up their membership. But I was like, oh, I need to sign up for all these things. I need to get 12 leadership positions. And that was one thing that I think, again, earlier on, leadership positions, there are more than enough to go around if you go out and seek them, but don't try to do everything.
I couldn't agree more. Just because you're going to be spreading yourself thin and it's going to just feel like more work. If you can find clubs where you are really enjoying what you're doing, you're excited to meet the guest lecturers, you're excited to talk to the upperclassmen about the involve in the ways to get involved, it's going to make it so much easier for these things to feel like a break from medicine in terms of studying rather than something else to add on top of your school. Because already studying is going to feel overwhelming. If you do clubs and stuff just to put them on your resume, it's going to be more and more work on top of it. So try to find ways to enjoy what you're doing, because inevitably you will burn out if you're just chasing after this like ideal med student application?
On that note, since we're talking about leadership, going into research, I think research is another big aspect. And I did talk about this in the video I did with Patrick, but it is one of those things that, like, as you are starting medical school, there are so many things, especially nowadays, that you can get involved with, and that I think can really spread yourself. But that's where you have to pick and choose. So, like, for example, like me, I would never do a bench work research project in medical school, because in grad school I did that, and I know the amount of time that takes, and I know the expectations for that. You're in lab, 8 hours a day, X number of days a week, and that's just not realistic with your schedule. And so I think when you are looking for research opportunities, is that you have to be not only just forthcoming and honest with your PI, but also look for opportunities that are going to be realistic with the schedule of a medical school student.
I think even with step one going past fail now, you see research becoming more and more of a way to distinguish students, because at the end of the day, when you get 1,000 applications for 3 spots in an orthopedic surgery residency, you need some objective marker that's going to help you differentiate between the students. And so being able to be productive on a research project looks really great. Now, as a first year, especially that first semester, it's really hard to be able to be productive in a research setting along with doing well in classes. It's not impossible. It's definitely possible. But I think the way to set yourself up for success, at least like at our school, is look for research opportunities, try to get an idea of what you find interesting, and then try to hit the ground running second semester at the earliest. The thing that I did first semester, and that I know a lot of our friends did, was look for mentorship and see what projects were available and what they kind of wanted to go into, and then pursue it according to that. And you knock on 100 doors, you might get 2 responses for people that want to do research with you, but you do really want to find people who are willing to teach you, because the biggest things I think you get out of medical school research are mentorship, with people giving you great advice because they've gone through the field themselves and they know what they're talking about. The second thing you get is really connections for a lifetime, because no matter what field you want to go into in the world of medicine, even though it's not the world of finance or business, connections matter so much. Who you know making a phone call for you completely changes your life. And if you can show up every day and try to learn something from the research you're doing, try to learn something from the club activities, and you have that like passion in you, more people are going to want to help you along the way. So when you are pursuing any sort of extracurricular, while it is important to have it be something you can put on your resume, really try to think about how it's going to benefit you long term outside of a paper like trail, right? Because that's going to be what actually helps you treat patients better in the long run, are all of these experiences.
And when it comes to mentorship, I think one aspect of mentorship that really goes understated is making that connection really can help you. Like you were saying, it's a lifelong mentorship and it's a lifetime relationship. They have 2 years to get to know you before they're actually going to write a letter for you. And they're like, hey, I actually know this person. I know their work ethic. I know what they're all about. I know what they're trying to do. And I think they would be a great person for your program. Because like, ideally, you don't want a generic letter. And a letter is not going to it's not going to make your application, but it can hurt it, and it can also help it. Because at the end of the day, you still have to interview. You still have to be able to like show that you are a, well-rounded applicant that like residents are actually going to want to spend time with. And so I think when you do have a mentor, especially a mentor that's in the field that you're interested in going, they can give you like the ins and outs of that field and really help you like understand like, hey, this is what I want from a resident when they show up in my doorstep, and this is what I expect from them. I expect them to do A, B, C, and D, and this is what I want from them. Because like if you go into a sub-I or a clerkship during your 3rd or 4th year, an audition rotation, and you're just kind of a fly on the wall and you're just like, I'm just physically here, rather than being engaged, being involved, asking questions at the right time, it's going to go a lot longer and it's going to go a lot further for you when it comes to someone like, actually, like I was really impressed by this person because they did ABC. And ABC may be something you may never have heard about until you actually talk to your mentor about like what they expect and what you should expect of yourself when you are going through those things.
Yeah. And one of the hardest things to do, I think, is put yourself out there. And I've heard one of the attendings who's been like a wonderful mentor for me so far say the med students really like to be like spoon-fed things. They really like to play the baby bird syndrome where they wait to be told to do certain things. And And I think a lot of that comes from the fear of messing up and just embarrassing ourselves, because we're all such type A perfectionist people that want to like look good to everyone, that we really try to hold ourselves to a very high standard. And if that standard has any level of failure attached to it, then we kind of shy away from it. But you really, really need to put yourself out there. And I think that while attending mentors are fantastic because they're in the field, if you don't feel comfortable doing that right away because you don't know how to approach them, start by talking to people in your school. They can even be people 1 year above you. My first mentor, I would say, was in our intercollegiate colleges. We have like a big little system, and my big was my like first mentor. And then like eventually like I got closer to some of the fourth years applying, and one of them became a really good mentor for me. And then he was able to kind of teach me how to approach like research, and he answered any dumb questions that I have. You have these medical students who went through what you did like a year or two ago. They're not that jaded and they want to help you. So any dumb questions you have, they'll happily answer. So then eventually when you start looking for mentors in the field that you want to go into, you know a lot more about what to do and the expectations of what you want to do. So the conversations that you'll have will go a lot farther. So start small, and eventually you'll understand more enough about yourself and the mentorship that works for you to find someone who can help you a lot more than just a generic mentor, like Jermaine was saying. Because yeah, one of the worst things you can do to yourself is try to find a letter from someone in the field just for the sake of having a letter, because people notice that. When you read 1,000 different like recommendation letters a year, you start to understand when someone is talking about a student they're actually excited about. First, they're just talking about a stock letter that they had to write because they were a program director.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not all letters are created equal, and not all mentors are created equal. So it is important to, pick and choose and make sure you're asking the right people to be your mentor and the right people to write you a letter. So wrapping up, final thoughts. Big thing, it's okay to feel stupid. It's okay to feel like you're overwhelmed, and it's okay to feel like you don't know anything, because, you're starting off this journey in medical school, kind of as a bit of a blank slate. So many people are coming from very different backgrounds. I started in engineering, you did kinesiology. We have people that did biochemistry. We have people that are like 30 years old, 40 years old.
PA.
They were PAs, yeah. We have people that have had entire lives before, deciding to come back to medical school. And I think it's very important to realize that like so many of these people are coming from very different backgrounds, and you're all starting at the same point. Make sure that you also utilize your resources wisely. So, utilize the people that can help you wisely, utilize your mentors wisely, ask the right questions, and try to find the right people that can help you and better understand what you're getting involved with and what you're trying to do. With studying, I think we talked at lengths about this, is like doing what works for you is really going to go so much further than trying to do every little thing that everybody told you is going to work. That works for them. If it works for them, doesn't always mean it's going to work for you. And I think it's one of those where once you've figured out a rhythm that's going to work for you, is trying to be honest with yourself, trying to stick with it, and then trying to adjust as necessary, because you don't have to break the wheel to be a good medical student. As we mentioned, I mentioned this as my example of taking 900 milligrams of caffeine. That is obviously taking the imbalance to an nth degree for myself. Give yourself the space and time to be successful. It's one of those where being honest with yourself is really going to help you take things a lot further. And then also trusting the process. Day one of your course, you shouldn't know everything. Basically figuring out what's working for you and trusting that it's going to work by the time your exam rolls around is going to be a lot better than like, okay, I feel so far behind, but I have 2 weeks till my exam. I'm like, yeah, but you have 2 weeks till your exam. You just started studying. It's not going to do you any benefits freaking out and trying to do more than you need to do, because you're just going to burn yourself out, and you're not going to be in a mental space and a physical space to be able to put your best foot forth when you're actually preparing for an exam. And so systematically working, figuring out what's going to be best for you when it comes to exam time, that is going to be one of those things that you have to figure out for yourself. And it is such a unique thing to you that the person right next to you, 10 people down from you, they're going to do what's going to work for them. And that's going to be one of those that you just can't hold yourself to the same standard as everybody else, and you can't expect the same thing out of yourself that everybody else expects out of themselves.
2 weeks may not seem like a lot of time, but it's kind of shocking how much once you get into a rhythm, you can get done and you can go from not understanding anything about a unit to basically having a semester's worth of knowledge in about 2 to 4 weeks. So really, really do trust the process, especially once you go through it one time for a test or 2 times and you've seen that it works. Even now, like I kind of psych myself out every once in a while. I'll be like, oh, I just did my second pass. I feel like I don't know anything. Third comes around, fourth comes around. I'm like, wow, okay, yeah. Just, it's nerve wracking, but you really do need to like trust yourself and know that you know the work you're putting in is meaningful.
So on that note, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Arpam, as well, for coming through.
Yeah, always.
That's going to be all for today's episode on the Dr. Rises podcast. If you haven't done so, go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. A bientôt.